Cup giant killings, the moments that remind us why knockout football is so special. Everyone remembers the likes of Hereford United stunning Newcastle, Wrexham knocking out Arsenal, or Sutton United dumping out Coventry. But for every famous shock, there are others that seem to fade into obscurity, barely talked about outside of the winning team's fanbase. Today, we're diving into 3 incredible upsets in English Cup football, giant killings that shook the competition at the time, but have since been largely forgotten. These are the nights when the underdogs defied all logic, humbled the giants, and wrote their names into Cup folklore, even if history hasn't given them the recognition they deserve. Strap in for our latest video, Cup giant killings you've probably forgotten about. On October 9, 2001, the League Cup delivered one of its greatest shocks. Liverpool, the reigning FA Cup, League Cup, and UEFA Cup champions, were tasked their first attempt in defending their trophy against a Grimsby town side battling to keep their heads above water in the old First Division. It was a game that barely registered for Liverpool fans at the time. The Reds, led by Gerard Houllier, had bigger ambitions, focusing on their Champions League campaign and competing at the top end of the Premier League. Grimsby, meanwhile, were enduring a difficult start to their campaign under the former Premier League manager Lenny Lawrence, struggling for consistency and desperate for any kind of momentum, and had recently fallen from the top of the table down to the bottom half in a matter of weeks. The Mariners had already come through 2 rounds to reach this stage, defeating local rivals Lincoln City 2-1 at Blundell Park, before edging past Sheffield United on penalties in the second round, after a dramatic 3-3 draw. But a trip to Anfield was an entirely different challenge. Liverpool had started the season well, unbeaten in the league heading into October, and possessed a squad filled with international quality. While the likes of Michael Owen and Steven Gerrard were rested, the Reds still fielded a formidable team. Dietmar Hamann, Jari Litmanen, Vladimir Smicer, and Sami Hyypiä all started, with experienced Premier League names like Gary McAllister, Nick Barmby, and Jamie Carragher providing further depth. Even the bench was strong, with Emil Heskey, Jerzy Dudek, Jamie Redknapp, and Patrick Berger among the options. Grimsby, by contrast, were in the midst of an injury crisis. Several key players were unavailable, forcing fullback Danny Butterfield to play out of position at centre-half. Their team was a mix of lower league experience, loanees and unproven talent, with the pick the bunch being Welsh international goalkeeper Danny Coyne, former Everton striker Phil Jevons, and Football League stalwart Paul Groves. Against all odds, they would have to withstand an inevitable Liverpool onslaught. From the opening whistle, Liverpool dominated possession, moving the ball with ease, while Grimsby sat deep, absorbing pressure. Litmanen, as expected, was the main orchestrator, finding pockets of space and pulling the strings. Time and again the home side came close, but Grimsby's defensive pairing of Butterfield and Marlon Brooms stood firm, throwing themselves in front of shots and disrupting Liverpool's rhythm. Liverpool had several golden chances to kill the game early. Litmanen's craft continued to unlock the visitors, but Danny Coyne proved equal to everything thrown at him. When Liverpool did beat the keeper, they were denied by last-ditch defending, most notably when Heskey's goal-bound header was somehow cleared off the line by Butterfield. The visitors were completely under siege, but somehow, against all logic, they held out for the full 90 minutes, dragging the game into extra time. Liverpool, however, finally got the breakthrough they had been waiting for. A tangle in the box saw on-loan Newcastle defender David Beharrell handle the ball, and the referee had no hesitation in pointing to the spot. This time, there was no reprieve. Gary McAllister, a specialist from 12 yards, stepped up. Coyne flung himself to his left, but he couldn't keep it out. Liverpool had the lead, and with just minutes remaining in extra time, it looked like the tie was settled. Then, the magic of the cup happened. In the 113th minute, good work down the wing from Stuart Campbell saw the ball delivered into the box. Bradley Allen's deflected header fell kindly to Marlon Brooms, the Blackburn loanee who wasn't known for his goal scoring. But in this moment, none of that mattered. He lashed the ball into the net, and the travelling Grimsby supporters erupted. Against all odds, the Mariners had found an equaliser. Liverpool, stunned, threw everything forward in search of a winner. But just as extra time neared its conclusion, the defining moment arrived. A long goal kick from Danny Coyne was flicked into the path of Phil Jevons, a local lad and lifelong Liverpool fan, who had been sold by Everton just months earlier. With little support, Jevons took a touch, looked up, and from fully 35 yards, unleashed a stunning curling strike. The ball soared through the air, dipping and swerving, before crashing into the top corner past a helpless Chris Kirkland. For a split second, silence fell over Anfield. Then came the realization, Grimsby were ahead. As the final whistle blew, Grimsby's players collapsed to the turf in a mix of exhaustion and euphoria. They had done the impossible. They had defeated Liverpool on their own ground in one of the greatest upsets in the competition's history. For Liverpool, it was an embarrassment, an early cup exit that raised questions about their ability to juggle multiple competitions. For Grimsby, it was the greatest cup night in their history, a night that would be talked about for decades. They would go on to lose 2-0 in the next round at Highbury against Arsenal, but that didn't matter. The Mariners already had a big fish in the bag already. On September 20th, 1995, in the second round first leg of the League Cup, York City, an unassuming second division side, produced one of the most incredible and underrated giant killings in English football history. Manchester United were, as they are now, one of the biggest clubs in Europe. Sir Alex Ferguson had built a squad packed with world-class talent. Despite losing both the Premier League title race and the FA Cup final the previous season, they were firm favourites for success in the new campaign. The club was in a period of transition, with Ferguson blending the experienced heads of Steve Bruce, Brian McClair, and Gary Pallister with the emergence of the famous class of '92. United were aiming to reclaim their Premier League crown, while also preparing for a European campaign, meaning the League Cup was perhaps not high on their list of priorities. Their opponents, York City, were hardly expected to trouble them. A solid but unspectacular second division outfit, modern-day League One. If you must, they had finished mid-table the previous season and were managed by Alan Little, a man under no illusions about the scale of the task ahead. The Minstermen had already brushed aside Rochdale in the first round with a resounding 5-1 win. But a trip to Old Trafford was something else entirely. The expectation wasn't just for United to win, it was for them to win comfortably. Despite Ferguson making changes to his usual starting 11, United still fielded a strong team. Peter Schmeichel, Andy Cole and Roy Keane were rested, while Eric Cantona remained suspended following his infamous Kung Fu kick incident. However, Gary Pallister, Paul Parker and Dennis Irwin formed part of the defence, while Lee Sharp, Ryan Giggs and Brian McClair added experience further forward. David Beckham and Phil Neville, both on the cusp of breaking into the first team, started the match. On the bench sat club captain Steve Bruce, alongside several academy graduates, in an era when only 3 substitutes could be named. York, meanwhile, had no stars, no household names, just a group of players who saw this as the biggest night of their careers. Future Premier League players Dean Kiley and Graham Murty were in the squad, but most eyes were on former Stoke City forward Paul Barnes. From the outset, York showed no fear. They didn't just sit back and defend, they took the game to United, pressing high and looking for opportunities to exploit any defensive gaps. The home side, though dominant in possession, lacked cohesion in attack, struggling to break down a well-drilled York defence. Then, on 24 minutes, Old Trafford was stunned into silence. United were dispossessed, and York worked the ball forward. It eventually fell to Paul Barnes, who unleashed a long-range shot that Kevin Pilkington spilled, gifting the visitors a shock lead. The pockets of York fans in the corner of the stadium erupted. United, irritated but composed, responded by pushing further forward. Giggs had a couple of half chances, but United's killer instinct was eluding them. As the second half got underway, everyone expected United to come out firing, overwhelming their lower league opposition. But instead, disaster struck. Young defender Pat McGibbon, making his United debut, pulled Barnes down in the area and was shown a straight red card. Barnes stepped up and coolly slotted home the penalty to make it 2-0. United barely had time to regroup before York stunned Old Trafford yet again. Just 3 minutes later, a free kick was lofted deep into the United box, and Tony Barras rose highest, looping a header over the onrushing Pilkington for 3-0. A smattering of boos rippled around the stadium. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. Ferguson, watching from the dugout, looked furious. With just over 15 minutes remaining, York launched another counter-attack, and United's defence, rattled and disjointed, failed to track the runners. A well-timed through ball found Barnes, who slotted home for what would have been his hat-trick and a stunning 4th goal. However, the linesman's flag went up, ruling it out for offside. York were later reduced to 10 men themselves when substitute Paul Atkin received a second yellow card for kicking the ball away, but it was too little too late for United. They came close to a consolation when Brian McClair rounded Dean Kiley, only to see his effort hit the side netting, summing up their miserable evening. Old Trafford fell silent. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a humiliation. a second division side had come to Manchester United's fortress and torn them apart. Incredibly, United still had the second leg to salvage some pride, and although they won 3-1 at Bootham Crescent, it wasn't enough to overturn the deficit. York City had completed the job, progressing 4-3 on aggregate. For Manchester United, it was a bitter pill to swallow, a reminder that even the best teams could be humbled if they underestimated the opposition. For York, it was a night that would never be forgotten, despite succumbing to a 3-1 defeat to QPR in the next round. On October 1996, in the second round of the League Cup, Lincoln City, then struggling in the bottom division of English football, delivered one of the most astonishing yet almost forgotten giant killings. Their visitors, Manchester City, were a club in turmoil. Relegated from the Premier League the previous season, City had endured a chaotic start to life in the First Division. Manager Alan Ball had resigned just weeks into the new campaign, frustrated at the sale of key players like Keith Curle and Niall Quinn. In his place, Asa Hartford took charge as caretaker manager, trying to steady a ship that was drifting off course. With no clear direction and a squad low on confidence, City arrived at Sincil Bank desperate for a positive result. Lincoln City, meanwhile, were a world away from Manchester City's struggles. Managed by John Beck, they were a third division, now League Two side, built on grit and determination rather than star power. They had already battled past Hartlepool United, winning 3-2 in the previous round, but facing a club of Manchester City's stature was an entirely different challenge. City had rested some of their biggest names, including Georgie Kinkladze, Richard Edgehill and Peter Beagrie, players who had the ability to change a game in an instant. But even without them, they were still expected to make light work of Lincoln. Their squad featured a wealth of top-flight experience, with the likes of Kit Symons, Nigel Clough, Nicky Summerby, and legendary strike duo Uwe Rosler and Paul Dickhoff, while promising youngster Michael Brown was given a chance to impress. In the other dressing room, John Beck's Lincoln side was largely made up of battle-hardened Football League professionals. Players like Captain Grant Brown, centre-half Steve Holmes, and goalkeeper Barry Richardson had years of experience in the lower leagues. But the standout name in their squad was Gareth Ainsworth, a dynamic winger whose relentless energy and attacking flair would eventually take him to the Premier League. If anyone thought Lincoln would be overawed by the occasion, they might have been convinced otherwise within seconds of kick-off. Uwe Rosler put Manchester City ahead almost immediately, finishing off a slick move to give the visitors the perfect start. The goal should have settled City, should have set them on course for a comfortable night. But instead, it only seemed to ignite Lincoln. Rather than folding, the home side responded with relentless energy, pressing high and forcing mistakes from City's shaky backline. It wasn't long before they found an equalizer. A well-worked move saw Terry Fleming take full advantage of a defensive lapse to bring Lincoln level. Suddenly, City looked rattled. Lincoln sensed vulnerability and kept pushing forward. The visitors, disjointed and lacking leadership, struggled to impose themselves. Then, just before half-time, Lincoln struck again. A set piece into the box caused havoc, and Steve Holmes was in the right place to fire Lincoln into the lead. City had gone from being in control to trailing at the break, and their frustration was evident. Asa Hartford's men came out for the second half, desperate to turn things around, but within minutes they were staring at disaster. Lincoln's relentless pressure paid off again, and this time it was Gisbert Bos who landed the blow. A long throw-in caused confusion in City's defence, and the Dutch forward capitalised, firing the ball home to send Sincil Bank into raptures. Manchester City, two divisions above their opponents, were now 3-1 down, and their attempts to mount a comeback looked increasingly desperate. Their defence looked vulnerable every time Lincoln attacked, and as the minutes ticked away, the unthinkable became reality. To add further humiliation, Lincoln grabbed a fourth. Once again, a long throw-in caused panic in the City defence, and John Whitney was there to put the final nail in their coffin. 4-1. The scoreboard was scarcely believable. As the final whistle blew, Sincil Bank erupted in celebration. Lincoln City had just dismantled Manchester City, one of English football's traditional giants, on a night that would live long in the club's history. Amazingly, City still had a second leg at Main Road to try and salvage the tie, but any hopes of a miraculous comeback were quickly extinguished. Lincoln, still riding the momentum of their first leg triumph, went to Manchester and won 1-0, sealing a 5-1 aggregate victory. It wasn't just a giant killing, it was total dominance over two legs, and Lincoln weren't done yet. In the third round, they continued their remarkable run by holding Premier League Southampton to a 2-2 draw at the Dell, proving once again that they could compete with top-flight opposition. But in the return leg at Bank, their journey finally came to an end, as Southampton ran out 3-1 winners to progress 5-3 on aggregate. For Manchester City, the defeat was a disaster, another embarrassing chapter in a period of decline that would see them relegated to the third tier just 2 years later. Asa Hartford's time as caretaker manager wouldn't last long, as City continued to spiral further into chaos as they were about to enter the debacle of the Steve Coppell tenure. But the result was Lincoln's, and remains a giant killing almost forgotten about outside of their fan base. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Here at Retro Football Club, we've got stories, goals, nostalgia, and much more. Until next time, see you later.